Overflow Beyond the Music is a podcast hosted by musician and pastor Josh McCabe and takes a deep dive into the life of artists into topics of faith, family, and seasons of struggle. This podcast is presented by Overflow Ministries Group. For more information about Overflow Ministries Group, visit overflowgroup.org.
All right, well, this is a little bittersweet for me today. Welcome to Overflow Beyond the Music. I am your host, Josh McCabe. Thanks so much for being here and listening to this episode, but this is my last episode. And it's crazy to think about because when this thing started, I don't know, we were just going to do a couple episodes and see what happened. And here we are finishing up, I think, a fifth season, and I want to say, I don't know, close to like 45, 48 episodes, something like that. Had no idea what this would look like or what this journey would be, and it's really just been a blessing. And I can't thank you guys enough for listening, for being a part of this episode, for listening to all the other episodes. We've had great guests in this time of doing this podcast, and I'm really hoping it doesn't end. I hope that the ministry can keep going and this podcast can somehow happen in a way, shape, or form, whatever that looks like. I don't know. But I know that for me, there's just been so many changes in my life and so many things going on just personally with myself, my family, my role here in Canada and doing worship and really just trying to discover what God does have and for no other reason other than I just really felt like God saying that this season for me was closing. I just really have to be obedient in that, and it sucks in a way because I really love doing this. Like, I love doing the interviews. I love doing the podcast. I love the team. I love Jeff. I love Kevin. I love Jackie. And in the early days, I loved working with Anthony too. And I'm so thankful for this ministry, for Overflow Ministries Group, for investing in my life and in my vision for this podcast, investing in you guys and investing in the artists. We've had everyone from, we started with Trevor McNeven of TFK, and we've had, Stephen Christian of Anne Boleyn. We've had Paul and Hannah McClure twice now, Josh Baldwin, Brian Johnson, some of the Bethel music crew that's been on. Zach Williams, mentioned like all male guests. We had Chris and Jody from Love and the Outcome, which was killer. We recently just had the Ginny Owens podcast. If you haven't heard that one yet, make sure you go check that out. You'll really enjoy that particular episode. I really enjoyed doing that one. Ginny Owens is, she's a gem. She's awesome. You really will enjoy the episode. I'm trying to think of what other highlights. Oh, Riley Clemens. She was such a sweetheart. She's so kind, so nice, so fun. That was one of my favorite episodes was Riley Clemens. And, I just am thinking about all the great things we've talked about and all the great conversations that have been had in this journey. I really hope people have been encouraged by getting to know the person behind the music, getting to know who these people are beyond the songs that they put out that you get to listen to. Because I truly believe if you get to know who they are and get to know their journey, the songs come to life in a whole new way. And that's been my favorite part, is seeing the songs speak to me in a different way when you get to know the journey and get to know the people. And that's really the heart behind why we did this. I'm thankful in so many ways to Overflow Ministries Group. And if you have not checked out what they're doing, please go to overflowgroup.org. That's overflowgroup.org. And they're doing some really cool stuff. I just saw a post recently on Kevin, who's the CEO's Facebook page, about some stuff they're doing with Overcomers Caring Ministries in Africa. And you will absolutely be touched by some of the work that they're doing to bring technology into some of these rural parts and just helping people in really practical ways with technology. So make sure you check them out, overflowgroup.org. But again, a huge thanks to Kevin Birch, the head honcho, the boss man here at Overflow Ministries Group. I want to thank you for believing in this and allowing this vision to take shape and it being really a highlight of the last couple of years of my life. So thank you for that. Thank you to Jackie and Jeff, who have really stepped in on the admin side in this season. Thank you to Mary, who was involved in some of the admin and some of the social media stuff for a bit, and Anthony as well, who was involved in that. I can't thank you guys enough. I love you guys all dearly. I love all you guys as listeners dearly. Please, I'd love to stay in touch with you. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Josh McCaves. That's JoshMcaves. It's a play on my music project called Caves. So Josh McCaves is where you'll find me. Please check that out. Or you can find me Caves Music on Instagram. But my last guest, with me as the host, is my good friend, Elias Dummer. So, as we go into the interview, this is the song Enough from Elias Dummer. My name's Josh McCabe. This is Overflow Beyond the Music.
Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. With nothing, I still have everything. Jesus, you are enough for me.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast, Overflow Beyond the Music. Josh McCabe here, and I am coming to you from Guelph, Ontario, which is just a little bit down the road from Hamilton, Waterdown, Ontario. And if you don't know where that is, that's okay. Many people are not aware of where that is, but my guest is very aware of where that is. His name is Elias Dummer. You may recognize his name from his band, the City Harmonic, which is now RIP technically, but he is not resting in peace from music in the least bit, and he's got some new stuff going on. So please welcome to Overflow Beyond the Music, Mr. Elias Dummer.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. Well, as good as anyone can be in this day and age.
Absolutely. It's funny to me that you're in Franklin, Tennessee, or like Thompson Station area.
Nolansville, actually. Yeah.
Nolansville.
Well,
Okay, so
technically Brentwood, but like kind of right on the line.
Okay, so like we lived like 15 minutes from each other, and we
I know.
never hung out. Like
It's super weird. Yeah.
it's funny.
How long? Where were you guys?
We were in Madison for the first year, and then the second year we were in Franklin. And everyone, when I say that we lived right by the Chick-fil-A and Target on the south end, everyone knows exactly where I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, we had a friend who lived up in Madison for a while, and it's funny, like I think every city does this, but there's like certain neighborhood, like in Hamilton, it wasn't quite like this. You just drove all over to the city to see whoever.
Yeah.
But I feel like in Toronto, you don't leave certain areas to go to other areas.
Exactly.
In Nashville, you don't leave certain areas. There's like a psychological barrier somehow between like Cool Springs and Franklin, and it's 4 minutes down the road.
I know. And you know who the worst at that was? And I'm going to throw him right under the bus, and we'll probably clip this for a little segment. But the worst guy for that was Dan Bremnes.
Oh, really?
I would be like, dude, come on down. We got the pool open. We'll get the grill going, and like the kids can play. And he'd be like, oh man, it's like 45 minutes. I'm like, dude, it's like 30. And he's like, no, it's 45. And he would arrive.
Was he in East?
Yeah, he's in East Nashville. And then he would arrive and go, 42 minutes. Like he would just let me know.
Yeah, not even a hello. I was actually, that's hilarious. It happens all the time. I mean, I have a bunch of buddies up in East Nashville, and it is really hard to keep up, and because everyone's always touring, and you move to Nashville thinking you're around people, and the truth is, it can be hard unless you live in the same part of town outside of work to like really feel connected. So you end up making lots of friends that have nothing to do with music, and then like seeing your music pals, for the most part for work. It's not what I expected.
Kind of end up planning like a trip, like, so living in Franklin, do you know Nick Baumhart?
Only a little, yeah.
Okay, so I worked at his studio, which was on Music Row, and it was like a little demo studio as part of a country music publishing place.
Yeah.
And like this publishing place, like they had legit, like they had Rascal Flatts and Dan and Shay Cuts and all that stuff. And but it was a great little studio right on Music Row. But if you're gonna go down there and work for the afternoon, I'd kind of plan to go see friends do some writers rounds or whatever. You kind of make a night of it.
Yeah.
Even though it's only like 25, it's funny because when you go to Toronto, it's like 45 minutes to an hour to get in. and you make a night of it. But some reason you get to Nashville in 20 minutes feels like a massive commute home.
Well, and it's funny too, because like Nashville traffic is a new phenomenon in that like it's real bad and they haven't figured out what to do about it. So you end up, you know, if you're not out of there I remember I was writing with the guys from Rend Collective a couple weeks ago, and we were having fun. I mean, I've known those guys a long time. We did our showcase together years and years ago. And so we've been buddies. And so we're riding, having a good time, you know, walking around, getting lunch, DoorDash, whatever. And we're getting close, and we're not quite done. And we could push for the extra 30 minutes, but everyone was just like, if you don't go now. And I was like, if I don't leave right now, I will be here all night. Like I will never get home. So and it's not even a huge distance, really. It's a 25-minute drive from where I live, with the highways and everything. And yet if I hit traffic, it's 2 hours. So it was just kind of not worth it. You know, we moved the right to text threads after that, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And like, I think my move was, I think it's like Tin Roof there, right on Tin Roof on Demonbreun.
Yeah.
Kind of on that side, would have like $5 chips and queso and like $5 quesadillas between like 3 and 7. So I'm like, I might just wait out the traffic a little bit.
Yeah,
and watch some sports highlights and grab some food. So
yeah, that's true. That's a good move.
Yeah. I mean, it got less and less frequent when bedtime became a little harder with the kids.
Yes.
As you can relate.
Yeah, we have 5. So it's now the oldest 2, we're not really doing as much of a bedtime routine anymore. I mean, our oldest is 14 and nearly 6 foot. But our youngest is 5. We've got a 5, a 9, and an 11-year-old. And they're all still kind of liking the bedtime routine, and they like dad to do it. So I try to, you know, I have enough leftover, not guilt is too strong a word, but it's probably an accurate one. But I have enough leftover touring guilt that if I can be home for dinner and bedtime, I will, you know?
Yeah, that's a weird thing about it. And my wife and I were talking about it last night as we were talking on the phone just with someone. And we had it on speaker. We were just kind of like all jumping in, just talking. And it's a weird thing because when you're home, you're home. Like, you're home all day. Like, you can go have a 1 o'clock ice cream run.
Right.
But then when you're gone, you're like gone.
Right. Yeah. And some couples are really, really good at like, I mean, I think it's just preference almost. Like I know in our band, there were a couple guys that would be on the phone with their wives like 7-8 times in a day. And like really kind of, it almost felt like they were with each other the whole time that they were out there. Right. Yeah. And that's just, Megan and I were never big on phone conversations that way. So like when I was out, we would make sure we connected once a day. We'd try to FaceTime with the kids or whatever, but it suited us better to not have 18 million phone calls in a day. So yeah, I totally think that's true for us. At least it was when I was away, it'd be like a couple check-ins. But otherwise there in the mode. And then when I'm home, it was home. Nowadays it's different because I don't tour very much anymore. I don't, and I'll play out and do conferences and stuff like that, right. But I'm not doing anything like what we did with City. And it's just a different thing. I mean, I have a church that I'm really involved in. I have a couple of business things on the go that I've had for a few years and some new ones. And, I've got a few different hats. And so I essentially work from home and occasionally travel, which is almost the opposite of how it was before, where it was, work away. And then when you're home, you're home and sometimes pretending to be at home because your head is somewhere else occasionally. But we always found the transitions to be the hardest. Coming home and leaving was harder than being home or being gone, at least on the kids. And so I know a lot of guys like Al Andrews will talk about that all the time. And so that's sort of a reality that we adapted to over the years and found strategies for and that kind of stuff. But it's a very different dynamic. And now it's interesting because almost everybody's been home for a year and a half, so everyone's going to have to find a new normal as things start to open up and events start to happen again and that sort of thing. So,
well, tell me a little bit about, because I know you guys would tour quite a bit, and it's funny. I was hanging out last week with Ryan Racine, who is your production manager, tour manager, whatever the title was exactly.
His job changed a few times, but it was always him.
Yes, exactly. And and we were just kind of talking about tour life and the things that become normal that are not normal. But tell me a little bit about City Harmonic. You were the front man, the singer. I know that you've been a writer for many years and worship leader and all those things. But City Harmonic really had a band feel and really did truly feel like a collective and not just Elias Dummer and the City Harmonic. It felt like a true thing. So tell me a little bit about how you guys connected and why there was such chemistry with that band.
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton, you can't separate, even though I didn't live in Hamilton for the back half of our career as a group, you can't separate the City Harmonic as an idea from Hamilton as a city. Hamilton had a really unique thing. I know you've heard this story before, but Hamilton had a unique thing where a lot of churches from different denominations were very practically working together. So I'm friends with Tim Day, who was sort of executive at the Meeting House for a long time. And he's always said the same thing. He's done a lot of unity work in different cities, and yet there doesn't seem to be a place where ecumenical work, I guess, like where churches working together has taken such deep roots that I've come across, and neither had he, than Hamilton, where you've got cities just literally sharing resources, sharing their people, co-laboring in like which neighborhoods to plant churches in, regardless of the denomination of the church, and all kinds of really incredible stuff. And so that movement had been really our upbringing. We grew up, I was kind of an intern coming out of high school doing youth ministry as that movement kind of found its feet and took shape. And so the City Harmonic was essentially the house band for the student arm of this missional ecumenical movement of churches working together to try to do something about the, Hamilton downtown at that time was, basically the armpit of Canada. So
it was going out to Hamilton tonight for dinner.
Oh, there you go.
I'm meeting a friend down there for dinner tonight.
Things have changed.
Yeah.
But it's, and at the heart of that really is the church, in some ways, is the church working together and investing in neighborhoods that everyone else was leaving behind. So when we formed the City Harmonic, we didn't go to the same church. We went to different churches. We were leading worship at a college and high school event called Cross Culture. And we didn't go to a church. So we didn't have like a common church culture to take for granted. We really had a sort of citywide faith culture or Christian culture, more specifically, to take for granted. And so with the City Harmonic, that meant we had to be more like a band. Even though we were writing worship songs, we had to think more like a band than a worship team, because the setting in which we led worship together was almost never a small local congregation. We each did that, but together we didn't. And so there was always a little bit more creative ambition for us because we knew we could flex muscles that weren't part of our day-to-day jobs, Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of what we were shooting for, and what we kind of sought to do. And it was pretty cool too, because we were literally like commissioned by True City, the organization of these churches working together, and sent out almost like missionaries to try to help churches come together across the world. And I mean, the better part of 2015, we spent doing exactly that. We pulled together pastors' roundtables, literally the members of the band calling pastors in 17 cities across the U.S. So that was a really, really big part of our ministry, and I think it bleeds through in our music and our DNA a lot, and in a lot of ways has sort of meant that we have relationships today.
Yeah. Do you miss that? I mean, I'm still in that sense. So though, as a artist, I've realized the complications of starting a project on your own, bringing other people into the fold, and then holding the project on your own at the end of it. You know what I mean? Where they kind of come in for the ride, and then when the bills come in, it's you.
Yeah.
But I do love that dynamic of still working out songs in a room with guitar, bass, drums, and like even have the bass player goes, yeah, maybe let's play like sub bass on the keyboard so I can add this piano part. Like, I still love the idea of working out songs as a band. Is there part of you in this season that has missed a little bit of that as you're making music now?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because I think age plays a factor there too. Like when we first broke, we were old enough that we weren't music kids. Like we had mortgages and kids and houses and all that. So there was a lot of pressure for each of us because we were all basically quitting our real adult jobs to do this thing. And so we all had a lot in it. So those first 2 records were really exciting, and there was like tension and all the things that make for a great record, right? But then the next 2 records didn't have the same urgency because we were an established thing at that point, right? And so the dynamics were different with each record that we made. But my role and my like how heavy-handed I tended to be wavered from record to record and that kind of stuff. And so I'd almost have to point to like if I think of one record that was the most like positive and just, all that, it would be the EP. And then I Have a Dream was one where, our producer came up to Toronto. We did a house studio in Oakville, and we were just basically locked in a room until that thing was done. And that brought with it all the good, the bad, and the like. We were friends and had been friends for years and years and years. So there was no risk of us like, falling out over it. But there was moments on that record where things got, a little heated. So it was, and that was fun. Like I look back and I think really fondly of that process. When you're a solo artist, there's no one to do that with you. Even if you have a producer that you work with and friends that you have cutting on the record, it's at the end of the day, you're the boss. Yeah. And that's a totally different dynamic. And I do kind of miss that. But it's also fun because I think listeners expect really different things from a band. Because I think they think of a band as an institution. And I don't know that they think of a person as an institution in the same way.
Yeah. So
an artist can flex muscles and try different things and kind of make one record to the next be quite different. Whereas if U2 puts out another Zooropa, I'm mad about it.
Well, it's funny you just said U2 because maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but you could find a guy, probably a college student, dress him up to look exactly like The Edge.
Yeah.
And he could play exactly like The Edge. You wouldn't even know he's missing.
Yeah.
But you would have never created the Joshua Tree without The Edge.
Right.
And nobody comes to see U2 for the, like, you know what I mean? You can't create the thing. You can replicate it, but you can't create it. And I think that's the unique thing is that you don't get that kind of thing without The Edge playing the parts he's playing and then, forgive me for forgetting his name, the bass player going, I got to fill in these gaps this way now because of that. And then Bono doing his thing. Like, it's the parts that come together. The
interplay. Yeah. Which I think is more necessary when you're younger. Is I guess what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's shaping. It shapes you.
As you get older, I think players are more apt to cooperate and collaborate and just do that anyway. Mm-hmm. So like if I go out now and I'm taking out players that are in their, mid to late 30s or, it's just a different experience because if they're a touring player and they're still working in their late 30s or whatever, like that's a person who doesn't really have that much to prove. And so they're happy to kind of come along and serve the song because ego sort of comes out of the bag a little bit, And I think that's really important for working together. And sometimes, especially in worship, and this is true for churches, it's true for bands. It's funny you mentioned the bass player in U2. Like I know there was this joke about Ringo Starr once upon a time. I think it was John Lennon, but it could have been McCartney. I'm misquoting, I'm sure. But where he was asked, what it's like to be what it's like to be in a band with Ringo Starr, the best drummer in the world. And he said, "Excuse me, Ringo Starr isn't even the best drummer in the Beatles." And so there's this sort of like thing about dynamics and interplay, which is really interesting because sometimes, like U2, if the bass player was not I think his name's Adam
Clayton.
Adam Clayton, yep. If he wasn't driving straight eights half the time, which anybody who picked up a bass guitar could do, right? It would be too much. They would lose some of that grounding, like you said, right? And so there's almost this like sometimes we think every player has to be playing at their max, and the reality is, I think that sometimes a sound or a dynamic or a feel is defined sometimes by the player's weaknesses or by the band's weaknesses as much as its strengths. Like I think my piano playing is mediocre. I can play fast, but that's not all that impressive. And so there's this sort of like, I would lean into octaves in order to make room. And we sort of created a space so that we could make a sonic wall together instead of each of us doing that. But that became a bit of a sound for us, a certain style of piano that had really nothing to do with me being a good pianist and everything to do with like doing what I knew how to do in a way that made room. And that was kind of all it was, you know?
Well, that's the funny thing is like when you go and you look at a tour lineup, you see a solo artist, and he's usually got like players that are playing far below their potential. But then you see bands that are huge, or big, they're bands, and they're a band. And you want, and like the guitar player saying, "Oh, I'm terrible." Like, and there's rare exceptions where, you know, on any tour they're on, Steve Augustine of TFK is the best drummer on the tour, like, or pretty close to it. Like, there's those odd situations where there's just true music, but on the other side, like they're never fully showing their skills, but then there's these bands that show their skill, and they're musicians so talented, but it doesn't seem to translate all the time.
Yeah, and it doesn't click. And I think it's like a Tom Jackson thing. He talks about that a lot. I think it's true for worship leading too. But if you're making music for other musicians first, you know, I think you're going to struggle commercially. And I don't think that's selling out. I think it's recognizing that like I think of, you know, playing in a club when I was 17 and I would sit at the back of the room unless it was really like my scene. You know what I mean? Like it was the bands that I love, the people that I love. If it was just random bands on a bill together at a club, like all the other bands are at the back of the room with their arms crossed. They don't want you to kill it up there. They're thinking about what they would do differently. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that can even be true in Christian music and in worship music, where you appreciate certain things about it and you might love it. You might try to turn that part of your brain off, but it's still there. And so I think it's important for almost every band that wants to make a go of something to look at the room and say, these people right here who aren't just like the peanut gallery, that's who I'm here to serve. Yeah. And if you're leading worship, it's like, hey, I'm looking for the guy. I'm looking not for the musician with his arms crossed at the back of the room. It's the opposite. I'm looking for the dude at the back of the room who isn't sure why he's here at all. The folks in the front row with their hands in the air, they're already here. It's the guy at the back that I'm worried about, you know? So it's almost always like knowing who you're there to serve. Like this is a moment for these people. And I you know, if you answer that question by saying everybody, I think you're being really dishonest, because it's not possible to please everybody. And in music, at least, it's almost impossible to please musicians. So I kind of try not to worry about it, but I do end up in that headspace often enough, or at least trying to make something I love, you know?
Well, and you talked about selling out, and that I go, you know, is a preacher selling out that is like a doctorate in 7 doctorates in theology, but yet he is preaching the passage in a simpler way so that people can register, or like a songwriter going like, you could write the deepest analogies. Everyone's like, what the heck is he talking?
Right.
Like, nothing translates. And so at that point, it's like, I remember saying this to a musician who was we were collaborating. He's part of my band. And I said, look, if you want to make music like that, that's fine. Just go make it for yourself.
Right.
But like, I'm trying to invite this room into worship, and that's not what I'm called to do in this moment. And so, go make those records and go and be proud of them yourself. There's something actually people will work on a car that no one else will appreciate, or build a shelf that no one else will appreciate. But it's all about the work, if I can say that, right?
Yeah,
Eli?
no, totally. Yeah, very well done. That's true. And I think with City, we did this with my own music. I've done this. I think it's sort of like trying to figure out the sweet spot of the Easter egg. You know, there's stuff where, you know, you can flex theological muscles, you can flex poetic muscles. And I think really the sweet spot is in figuring out and country music does this really well. And I've tried to do this with worship songs. And I'll admit, a lot of worship songs, and I've done both, really struggle to find this balance where there's like layers in a line, where I'll try to use a line that can be taken one way or taken another, and both are true and correct. And I kind of always try to insert those things. It's something David Crowder did a lot of, and I was, always kind of inspired by, was to have a surface meaning and then also something underneath it, that if somebody really lives with the music for a while and listens to enough time, they start to see, hey, wait a minute, there's something else going on here, and it kind of becomes an Easter egg, right? Yeah. I've always really been drawn to that sort of thing. It's like an extra dopamine kick down the road, and it adds depth to my experience in music. But sometimes we just write songs that are the plain surface meaning, and that's good. But sometimes we do it just because we're lazy. Like we use borrowed phrases, or we're like, well, it's really about something else. Like, no, what we do when we write worship songs is substantial and meaningful and important. Like we play a huge role. I mean, this is maybe a bit controversial, but like I argue that worship music, like singing together in church, I don't mean the consumption of worship music, singing together in church is as essential to discipleship as preaching.
I 100% agree.
And the crazy thing is, we're instructed to sing a lot in scripture, right? And the Psalter was obviously the songbook of the church until like 200, 300 years ago. But like pretty much the science is really one-sided on this. You want to look at how people learn. You want to look at how much retention happens from a sermon or any lecture style conversation. It's the truth is, singing together is a holistic experience of prayer that is practically unmatched in terms of inner work and what it does to us as people. Like the effects of oxytocin on the brain, for example. You get a bunch of people singing together, the brain produces oxytocin similar or just slightly less than sex. So now you're talking about a room full of people. What does oxytocin do? Well, it's called the love hormone. It gets people to trust each other. It gets people to feel social bonds. And University of Bonn has shown it also produces altruism. So literally, we sing together, we trust each other more, we feel a deeper affinity for the object of our song, and then we leave wanting to fulfill love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this actual science of it is insane. And in this last year and a half, what have we had in Christianity? No singing together.
Does that not feel... I don't want to get too political or too off the rails on this, but here in Canada, like we're meeting together with 30% capacity. We have to wear masks, and we're encouraged and instructed to not sing.
Right.
And I just go like, politicians are not that smart, and they're not that aware of the power of singing.
Right.
But I know of a principality that is aware.
Sure. Right.
Of that, and I can't think of like a more, we got put in lockdown right before Christmas.
Right.
And then, they're talking about a third wave hitting right around Easter. I'm like, oh man, like, and I'm not trying to say this is conspiracy, but I also think that the enemy is very aware of the power that there is in singing.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's a reason why it says that the angels in heaven are not, saying, holy, holy is the Lord, but they're singing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And we all join in it. I mean, I think so I'll say two things. One, I am probably not in the challenge the state on whether or not churches should meet crowd. I am big into the science. I think the responsible thing is to do what's best for our communities at large. I think that the challenge churches face, and we're facing this now, is how aggressively. Well, what does those lockdowns and remote video and all this kind of stuff reveal about where our people were really at and how and what they valued about gathering? It reveals an awful lot. And because I'm really fond of the science, I'll be first in line as soon as it's available to get a vaccine here in the States. And on top of that, like that whole thing about singing is really interesting because you've got politicians and people who are like afraid to sing at church because of an article about a German choir practice. And yet they're out at barbecues outdoors yelling at each other over their kids. Yeah. So like the reality of the science is that if you're singing with a mask, that's really not that different
Yeah.
Than talking loudly with a mask, which is what, by the way, everyone in a mask is doing because we can't hear consonants. So either we become silent as a society or we recognize what risks really are versus what they not. And I think that the reality is at the political level, it's an easy thing to point to. They're not driving that home here in the same way in the States, at least. But the States has been a bit, in my opinion, a bit avant-garde or a bit kind of laissez-faire, probably more than it should have been in some ways.
And most of our listeners are listening from the States anyways,
right?
Even though I'm in Canada, and I would say I have the same approach as you, where I want to be very clear too for anyone listening that I think I actually love what Bethel did, where they weren't meeting for a number of months, whereas other churches in the city were meeting, and Bill Johnson got up and said, "We're not meeting because we love our city, and we'd hate for anybody to think anything but that we love our city."
Yep.
And that's why. And
yep.
we will meet again, and we will do it in a safe way. But right now, that's the decision to make. And yes, being in church ministry, and you're in a role as well where we're all navigating this. How do we honor? How do we honor people? How do we honor perception? How do we honor the government? And how do we still honor God and realize that we are in a spiritual battle for souls and for freedom in people's lives.
Yeah. Well, and I think in some ways it's a lot like a really long Lent. I mean, like we've kind of have this reality of people unable to do their normal, right? Yeah. And so what does that give us reason to do? And that's really where, I'm working on a record right now that's going to come out this year. And that's really a lot of what I was wrestling with. And I'm like, we all were. It's like, hey, wait a minute. So we do this thing. Why do we do this thing? I mean, maybe we know the answers, but do our people have any answers? Do I even believe my own answers? What motivates me? Why am I don't know. There's a lot of that. Like, it's easy to sort of make a mental career out of something that, for me, I've that's sort of why I got involved in other business stuff as well, because it's important to me to know that my motives are right and good, and that I'm doing things for reasons that I want to be doing things for, But it's tough because you really do have, like, what is the gathering for? What does when we get together as a church do that no other medium can replace? And the short answer is communion, public reading of scripture together, and the recitation of scripture through song. And that's I think where worship music plays a really crucial role in helping us pray in an aligned way, and not just with each other, but with ourselves, like that kind of sense of a holistic prayer. Singing does that in a really, really special way. So as politicized as it is, and as much as it breaks my heart to say this, like, we're back together now with masks, and the congregation's pretty quiet. Like, we're struggling with the same things. And I think many people are. And yet I think we press on, I think we need to lean into expecting that wherever we're coming from, God is with us in that, that God is with us in our meeting, that he's, in some ways resetting where we've come from and where we're going as the church in North America. And I actually kind of think it's long overdue.
I felt that the same, as we were in lockdown and I was filming worship sets to an empty room.
Yeah.
Which is weird. But, we just took the opportunity to do a lot of spontaneous stuff where all of a sudden it's like, oh, I realized the same progression as this song and like we went into like Heart of Worship and then like Hungry by like, we went to some old school stuff, and it was right. And even being moved to tears at times. And it reminded me that, like, worship is between, and maybe you can elaborate on this, but like, worship is this thing between the Lord and I that I want to, this moment that I'm having as I'm singing, that I want to invite other people into with me. And sometimes I need to do things differently to invite people along. But it reminded me that like, it's up and out.
Yeah, and it's vertical and horizontal, not either or.
And sometimes totally. I think, especially in churches, when you're doing 6 services of the same set, it can get a little bit, you can lose that. And
Yeah.
that freshness reminded me of that feeling again, you know?
It does. I think I'd almost push back on that though. And here's why. I think the outcome of worship, if you want to look at it that way, right, is discipleship.
Right.
And so sometimes worship leaders will get into this kind of conversation and hang up about the idea of performance as though service 4, 5, 6, where you're going through the motions is inherently bad, you know? But the funny thing about that is, like, if you look at the etymology of the word performance, right, it's actually performo. It's a church Latin word, and it means to form thoroughly. So there is a sense in, I think, real life where sometimes the habits that we are doing are most effective when we are no longer directly attentive to them.
Yeah. Oh, I'd agree. I agree.
And so in a lot of ways, like, that sense of repetition and serving the room in the moment is not only okay, but a good thing, you know, because we are taking on the person of Christ in the moment. I think there's sometimes this tendency to see worship leaders as always serving as a lightning rod for the Holy Spirit for the room, as if like, but I've rarely seen that not turn into some sort of like egotistical, you know, manifest destiny or something, where they're sort of like convinced that every whim they have is the Holy Spirit. And we all know that's not true if we take a step back. So I think there's this tendency to, C.S. Lewis has a great quote about this, talking about poets and musicians and writers. He says, I'm going to mangle it, but he basically says something to the effect of, you know, they're so in love with the telling of the thing that they no longer love the thing itself, right? Yeah. And I think that's a really important precaution for worship leaders. It can be really easy, I think, to fall so in love with the feeling and the high of the romance of worship, if you will, like that kind of oxytocin dopamine kick, you know, that we stop actually recognizing that what we are there to do is pray with this group of people so that we together, both me and they, not just I, are having this shared moment of prayer and intimacy with God. And the reality is sometimes shepherding means being not a sheep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I think, like, when you're leading worship, service 5s, I just don't see it as that frustrating that, like, I don't know. I guess there can be, I could see it being just as problematic the other way. Where
I think we're saying the same thing. Like, because what I'm saying is, like, when you get into that mode of everything is normal, you do. I want to say going through the motion. You're not going through the motions. You're leading. You're bringing your sacrifice. You've done the work during the week, but there's that moment where it's like you fell in love all over again. Like that moment of, like, you just, like, you love your wife, you kiss your wife, you hug her, you date your wife, but then there's sometimes those moments where you just catch her across your room at a wedding or at, like, a function. You're like, holy junk, like, and it hits you differently.
Right.
And I kind of want to pivot to talk about your record, because as you worked on these other projects and stepped away from City, when you were involved in City Harmonic and touring, and I know you're always involved in music, always writing, but it can become, you know, you got two writes scheduled this week, 3 writes scheduled, 100 songs a year, whatever that is.
Right.
And when you're not writing for anything, it feels different, anything particular. Yeah. What was it like sitting down and writing again for the second record, for the second volume, after putting one out and kind of getting back into that rhythm, but then revisiting it now, knowing that there is an audience that you're writing for? Yeah.
Well, it's a weird moment for sure. I mean, the work volume 1 was a bit of like, wasn't the point of crisis at all. It was sort of like, you know, okay, well, I did City Harmonic. Does anyone care if I do anything else? And so out of that kind of headspace came Enough and the work and songs like that. And this kind of, there was a different sort of urgency, no desperation, but more of like, does this matter? You know? Right. And also I look back on it and see that there was like certain itches that City Harmonic was never going to scratch that I just had to scratch. And so
Yeah,
you do that too. And I think this record is feeling a lot more cohesive, and so much has happened in the last, I mean, you look at race relations and justice, you look at the COVID-19 thing, you look at all of the stuff that's gone on in the politics of the world and its relationship to the church, and how embarrassing the church has been so often through so much of that. And it's like, oh my gosh, there is so much to say. How the heck do I say anything substantive without saying all of it, or, playing into the hands of something that I don't want to play into? And that's really been a big challenge as I do this. It's like, have I written too many pointy songs this time? Am I pointing enough at myself? Am I, that kind of stuff? 'Cause I think worship music sometimes, you read the Psalms and you never get the sense that David is generalizing in order to avoid being specific. Like,
right.
David never wrote, "Hey, dude." It was always, "Hey, Jude." There was a name in mind. There was a thing in mind. There was a feeling in mind, sometimes literally naming a valley or a place or a whatever. So you read the Psalms and they're real. They're human, as sacred as they are, because they are real and tangible. They have places and names and things in them. And so as I set out to write this record, it was a lot more like that. It was kind of, I think it can be really tempting in worship to fall into the tried and true, safe bet words. Yeah. But the problem with that is that they feel ungrounded. And I think if there's anything our prayers need right now, it's a healthy dose of reality, And
I think as I look at worship as a whole, and I truly believe this, is that we need complicated songs. We need songs with 6 verses. We need simple songs that repeat and repetitive. We need songs that are beautiful musically, instrumentally, songs that are theological. We need all of those things because they all are tapestries. But right. The real test is, and not to ever put it's an unfair burden and not one we should take too literally, but does it lead people anywhere to Jesus? Mm-hmm. And if a song that repeats the same old thing, think about it, like he loves us, oh how he loves it. You can just bring that out anytime and it'll bring people somewhere. But that is the most basic, obvious lyric.
Right.
Repeated on the same 4 chord pattern. Yep. But yet there's something to it. And
yeah, totally. And yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid of simplicity at all. I mean, I wrote a song with a 1-word chorus. So but so that's totally true. I mean, there's that moment of, does this help people get where they're needing to go, but I think there's also, I think in a lot of ways it's that constant fight for that balance of authenticity, of saying this is coming from a real place, this is for a real people, versus kind of pure pragmatism. Sometimes as a songwriter, when you're in the discipline of songwriting, it can be really easy to just be like, oh, I'm pumping out a song today. Mm-hmm. And you just do that. You check your box, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to change the process on this record, and I've long tried to do this where it's a little different. I'll write melodies separate from lyrics and try to get the feeling right and wait until I have something to say for my own music anyway, before
the rhythm's good too, right? The rhythm of just writing all the time, as a muscle is good.
Yeah.
And,
that's totally good. I just separate the pieces. So I'm totally. I'm going to sit down every day and have the discipline of coming up with ideas. And I'm going to constantly be curious and taking notes. But the art of this idea, this melodic thing matches this lyrical thing versus this Bible study I just read. Sorry, my kids are just coming in the door. But these things come together, and that moment doesn't happen every time you sit down. The discipline of sitting down is going, I need to ideate. I need to have a thing. I need to take my notes. I need to write my lines. But the pressure of finishing a song is a different animal, and something that, animals. Sorry, here we go. Hey, hon, thanks. My daughter is just delivering an Amazon package. I'm on a call, sweetie. Okay, great. Thank you.
I love it. You get to see the family dynamic. And I know we got to wrap up here because I just want to.
You're good.
I want to really quickly just point to the work volume 2 that you just finished crowdfunding for. You met your goal.
Yes.
I was following along and saw that you met your goal there. And virtual choir. Just tell me quickly about that, and then we'll close off here.
Yeah. So City Harmonic always did these, like, we did Mountaintop, where we got a whole bunch of people to upload their videos. Yeah. Middle of the lockdown quarantine thing, I did the same thing with a music video for the song Good. And I just thought it'd be so fun to put that on an actual record, like to get people from all over the world singing. And it's easier than ever to do this. So that's really what we're doing. We're going to set up an upload thing for everyone who backed the Indiegogo project, and set up, like, we're going to build the tracks in a certain way so that they can do it with their headphones and record an isolated vocal. And then we're going to literally create a separate session where we stack them all. And so we're going to have a choir singing on this record from literally all over the world. We've got people in Australia, people in South Africa, people in Latin America, in North America, of course, Europe, and bring it together for this great recorded thing, even in the midst of all that's been going on. So I'm actually really pumped about that, because there's this, like, I don't remember what music video or photo it was of the Beatles. A lot of Beatles references today. Yeah. But there's this thing, I think it was for Hey Jude, and the Na Na Na's, where they're playing, he's playing piano, and people are just, like, hanging over the piano and off the edge of the stage, and, like, the line between the crowd and the artist is gone. They're one and the same. And I'm obsessed with that idea. I'm obsessed with figuring out what it looks like to erase the fifth wall and say, hey, us here in this moment, we're an us. It's not just me here and you there. The stage is in the way. Let's get rid of that. Let's break that wall and be one thing together. And anywhere I can bleed that into the creative process, I will.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's so good. And I can't wait to listen to the fullness of the project when it's done. And tell me, a little bit about when you expect to be able to release that to the public.
Yeah, so I think we're probably going to be dropping our first single. I mean, it's 2021, so you got to do things one at a time. Yep. We'll drop our first single in May, June, and then a couple more after that. So late summer, early fall at the latest, we'll have the full record out, and I am very pumped.
And the Work Volume 1 is already out. And
yes. And as is The Rest Volume 1, which was a B-sides EP that I was really, really fond of. So,
well, I'm going to leave it to you, because I always want to know what you want to hear, because typically when you close a podcast with a song, you kind of go to the most played song or the current single. Yeah. But I always want to hear what's special to you, and what really is a song that you feel like maybe people haven't heard it if they gloss over the record, but like you want someone to sit on this moment.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds cliche, but I really am fond of Enough. So I'm grateful that the song got the life that it did. Mm-hmm. I did that EP, The Rest Volume 1, had a whole bunch of weird musical muscles on it, which I'm really fond of. There's a song, A Time to Dance, which is like this weird alt grunge disco thing, which sounds very strange, and is. It's literally a disco song inspired by Ecclesiastes. But so that's weird. But probably the song that hits hardest for me from that first album is called The Work, It Ain't Easy. It's kind of one of those lyrical things where it's pretty earnest and kind of out there, in a sense of like laying it all out there, and I'm really fond of that. So those are probably the three that I'd check out.
Well, I think here's what I'm going to do. We're going to play Enough coming into this podcast, and then we are going to play The Work, It Ain't Easy following right now. So
awesome. That's perfect.
This is Elias Dummer here as my guest on Overflow Beyond the Music. My name is Josh McCabe. Go check out his 2 EPs that are out, The Rest and The Work. Go also, and when it's available, we'll make sure to put it on our socials to get The Work Volume 2. This is The Work, It Ain't Easy, right here on Overflow Beyond the Music.
Never be enough. You've no expectation that when all the work is done, that I'll have done it on my own, with a helping hand I found in my own heart. For me, the hands of grace are pierced with pride. It ain't easy for the self to die.
Well, I felt like I wanted to say goodbye one more time, and I can't thank you enough for listening to this podcast, for being part of this journey. Again, my name is Josh McCabe. It's been a blast hosting this podcast, being part of a great season here. I'm really excited about what God's going to do next, both in my own life and through Overflow Ministries Group. And I'm excited about what God is going to do in your life as well. Please connect with me, Josh McCabe's on Instagram. But this is me signing off. My name's Josh McCabe. This is Overflow Beyond the Music.
There's no expectation that when all the work is done, I'll have done it on my own, with a helping hand I found on my own arm. It's hard to say not my will, Lord, but thine. It ain't easy for the self to die. It ain't easy for the self to die. So here's my resurrection. You will always be enough of every expectation that when all my work is done, you'd have done it on your own. With loving hands we nailed a wooden board. The hands of grace were pierced so I could find. It ain't easy for the Christ to die.